This week's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com and the StarCityGames.com weekly sale, where this week you can tap into some great deals with 10% off all non-basic lands. Grab your Urza Sagas, deliberate on which version of new or old Scalding Tarn you want to play with, or just stock up on some pathways that you will certainly need for this upcoming cycle of Standard. Whatever you want, check out StarCityGames.com from Monday, June 28th through Monday, July 5th for your land grab. Or come back to that page each week to check out our latest sales. That's StarCityGames.com/SALE, where this week you can tap into 10% off all non-basic lands. This week's Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Take a look at their t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and just general stylings at coalesceapparel.shop. Then use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your entire order. And seriously, I want to emphasize that sticker part. Shirts are cool, but you can send a targeted message with a sticker. Slap it on your deck box if it matches your commander, or if you really want to get inventive, find a way to slap the 3x4 sticker on your 2.5x3.5 Magic card, maybe with a sleeve, maybe with a hard case. You're inventive people, you'll find a way to make it work. So, take a look at coalesceapparel.shop, check out their product lines like Wooburg Forever and Ravnica University, and see what catches your eye. Remember, use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10%. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 12 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by the fine folks at Star City Games. I'm Dom Harvey, I'm here with Ari Lax, and today we're doing what all of us would do at one point or another, and that's admit our own mistakes.
Yeah. I did the math, and there were a lot of mistakes. We're talking about our initial top 8s from a couple of weeks ago now, a few weeks, when the full set list of Modern Horizons 1 was first released. Dom and I both made a top 8 list of our expectations for the set. And I am happy to say up front that I had one of my 8 cards remain on that list, though there's some caveats there.
Okay. Yeah, we didn't actually do this for Strixhaven, where if we had, I think that was less of a challenge. And although even there, I missed expressive iteration entirely, and you had to teach me in real time why that was going to make a big difference in Modern. So still lots of opportunities to get these things wrong, even with these smaller sets, which are expected to make less of an impact. And that's part of the fun. That's why the game is still an engaging challenge, which renews itself time and time again after so many years. But always a good way to kind of remember that you're mortal and humble yourself and, not state anything with too much certainty, because who knows what's going to happen a few months from now.
Yeah, Patrick Sullivan had a really good rant about this on the Modern Horizons resleevables, where he basically just says everyone is so bad at building decks, you can never trust anything they say. But,
yeah,
that
friend
might
of the show or friend of the show, or possibly a spawn enemy of the show now. I don't know if we're feuding officially with receivables now after the whole Plague Engineer fiasco, but I don't know if we would win that feud. I don't know if that's a wise rabbit hole to dive down, but yeah, Patrick always good at putting people in their place on these topics, and as he also likes to say, if you have ever been wrong about anything, consider that this may also be one of those times, and that's a wise maxim for life as well as just for card evaluation.
Yeah, I think that's actually a WotC R&D inherited quote. I forget who the original source of it was, but I remember it just being a completely brutal thing that was dropped in a meeting.
Yeah, I think it's hard to work in game design for that length of time and not learn that lesson firsthand at various points across the years. But from our perspective, as people trying to figure this stuff out in the wild, we certainly made our fair share of mistakes. I'm sure there are cards which the community at large either slept on during preview season or massively overhyped. And we've seen a lot of those evaluations change over the past, is it a month now that we've had to play with these cards?
Just under. I guess this episode will... Once this episode releases, it will have been a month.
Okay, so even within that relatively short space of time, we've seen a lot of churn in the format. a lot of new conclusions to come and unpack here every week. But before we do that, we'll get into the results from the weekend and see what those teach us about where the format is going. And we have a decent amount to sink our teeth into. We're recording this on the Sunday just after the Modern Challenge there is wrapping up. And I guess we'll start with Saturday Challenge instead, because that continues some trends that we've seen really develop in the format over the past week or two.
Yeah, so the Saturday Challenge was won by Kane Reinhardt playing the, Dimir Asmore Urza deck, but it's splashing red. I think that we had Devin on last week, and he was kind of whatever on Ragavan. And I think from there, people just kind of figured out you can just play the red sideboard cards, have a third color, and just get the value of having black lands game one.
Yeah, this red splash here is just for a Braid in the sideboard and one Pyrite Spellbomb in the main deck. And I guess this technically is also a blue source that casts Asmore. And if you want Engineered Explosives somewhere in your 75, then just having access to a third color helps with that. But it does make me wonder if red is the splash color that you want, where we've seen Prismatic Ending really rise up in Modern over the past week. And it seems like that as your splash, you've got the third colors and can maybe unlock more via Springleaf Drum or something. Maybe that would be a better sideboard card instead.
Yeah, that card's pretty good. You could go like full on Disenchant if you wanted to start attacking your opponent's Urza Sagas in the mirror. Something like that in white.
I don't know if Teferi Time Raveler is a card that you would have any interest in, but that basic core of the blue, more artifact-centric Urza Shell, or I call it an Urza Shell. It's really more of an Asmore Shell, but I think that mistake is indicative of the direction the deck is taking, where you have this fully fledged backup plan now. I think we're going to see more and more of that, and the original Golgari base, the food-centric version, really seems to have dropped off the map in the past week or so.
Yeah, I think that there was just a lot of discontent with Feasting Troll King, and from there, it all kind of falls apart as to why you have green cards in your deck compared to just going down the, blue cards can do everything too road.
Yeah, and I think the evaluations that we have now, some of these top 8 card rankings, are going to reflect the evolution of those Asmore decks over time, including Asmore itself, which was absent from, I think, both of our initial lists, and will definitely, I imagine, have earned a place this time around. We also saw Canister making, I think, a third back-to-back challenge top 8 appearance, 2 of those having been with Amulet Titan, but this one being with a package near and dear to my heart. This is Through the Breach in Amulet, and we have 3 Through the Breach in this list, 3 Emrakul. Not quite sure on the numbers there. It seems like starting with 4 Breach and 2 Emrakul, given that you also have Titans as valid Breach targets, and you'd much rather draw, several Breaches than several Emrakuls, even though the ideal is one of both. But either way, that package, a good example of that Amulet Titan core being so fundamentally powerful that the first 50-something cards are locked in, and then it doesn't really matter all that much what you fill in the rest with. But I think the Breach package does address several specific problems for the Amulet deck. So we're seeing Asmore specifically as a way to kind of lock up the board against these creature decks, where dealing 6 damage to something is surprisingly obnoxious for a lot of decks. And when you're trying to either resolve Primeval Titan or have your Titan die so that you can set up a Dryad, which also in turn dies to Asmore, then that one card can effectively lock you out of the game. And Asmore does still kill Emrakul, given enough time, given enough food, but the numbers there, that gives you more time to work with, and sometimes you just get to Breach Emrakul on turn 4 and just plow through their board. It also deals with Blood Moon, a lot of Blood Moons in this format at the moment, and having a red way to either just one-hit KO them with Emrakul, or you Breach in a Titan, that gets you the lands that you need to then cast other spells and go from there. It gives you more threats. It's a good way to kind of bait out counter magic against some of these more reactive decks, and we see in the Sunday Challenge this week a lot of these tempo shells with Counterspell, Archmage's Charm backing up the traditional cast of Dragon Rage, Chandler, Murktide Region, and creatures in that space. So it does address a lot of the specific issues with the deck. I don't know how well it does that in total, or if this is like the next form of the deck, but something to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, the rest of the top 8s of this event and the rest are all kind of expected decks, with one minor exception, I think. But Yeah, a lot of, I think the one thing that we see across these events, kind of move on to the Insight esports event, which is a similar size to a challenge, give or take, is the rise of the Ragdos stuff shell. I don't really know how else to describe it. It's just like Ragdos Luris and good creatures. That event was actually won by a deck with Dark Confidant in it for a kind of snapshot of what things look like.
Yeah, it's Dark Confidence surrounded by a lot of much stronger cards that I think are doing most of the heavy lifting there. And I don't know if there's a better 2-drop that you can replace Confident with altogether. But yeah, this basic Rakdos Ragavan Shell, I know this one, a lot of people will have picked it up because of Aspiring Spike, but this isn't really an Aspiring Spike deck in the sense that, this has the kind of trademark signature of his decks, and then people pick it up and the leagues are infested with a short time. This is a pretty simple template of, well, the black and red cards of this new set are very good, and we're going to pair those with the great black and red cards that have defined Modern for years now, and that is a match made in heaven. And I think this is the place to go if you're someone who really misses the time when John was the best deck in 2013.
Yeah, and I think it's important to shout out Dragon's Rage Chandler, just as like these decks are all about getting incremental value over time and getting good exchanges. And when you're slimming down, you have two options. You can either trim lands and play cantrips, which to this deck does to some extent, but I think it's kind of hard to do outside of like the significantly worse now blue cantrips. Whereas Chandler just kind of does that in a really nice proactive way. Ragavan as well. And, also Croxa. Just like every card in this deck does it, honestly. But Chandler really, really does it.
Yeah, this is a great Lurrus deck. And part of that is Lurrus stopping you from tricking yourself into playing some of these more expensive cards. And so the fact that you're not trying to go all the way up the curve to something like Bloodbraid Elf in their shell, I think that would be a mistake anyway. But also, Lurrus just gives you all of the upside there without much of the downside. And that's just the 8th card for free that you get access to in every game. 1 2-drop, or technically a 4-drop, I suppose, that works its way under that restriction is Turok, Dread Cantor, which we didn't talk too much about during the previous season. But this is a nice thing to have at the top end of your curve, if you think the format is going in a more grindy direction.
Yeah, I still don't understand this card, but it shows up so often that I have to believe I'm somewhat wrong about it. My experience is playing with the card in the Orzhov shells with Stoneforge Mystic, where that it just kind of was like awkward to time. I did talk a bit about like Grief being a good card to hardcast, and this sort of does an impression of that, but like the baseline of this where you don't kick it is so bad.
I think this may be yet another case of the first 55, 56 cards are all very good, and then you need to round it out somehow, and whether that's with Bob Maher himself, Dark Confidant, or Turok, or I guess Magmatic Chandler could make a return after it sounds weird to say that about a card printed in like October of last year, but that one has really had a rise and fall in the modern format. Rise-Fall itself is kind of an appealing card too. Lots of ways to round out that shell. One thing that I do want to shout out here is Unholy Heat, which has been gaining more and more traction, not just in these decks, but also in the kind of Is-It tempo shells that really did well in this Sunday challenge, where this covers a lot of the ground that Fatal Push misses, where stuff that goes higher, like Storming Entity, Motide Region, any of the various things which are not 5-drops in practice, but technically have a sticker price that gets them out of the range of Fatal Push. This covers most of that ground, while also being a good answer to Planeswalkers, which is not the most relevant that it's ever been in Modern right now, but you still don't want to leave yourself completely vulnerable to something like a Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, or something like that. So when these cards cover each other's bases, that's really good. And then also, there are a lot of matchups against these creature decks where you want as much good 1-mana removal as you can get your hands on, and this is one more card in that column there too.
Yeah, this card has just looked really impressive across the board. I think the thing that kind of locked it up for me is that it's one of the cards that can actually race a Renin 6 ticking up early. Even if, you have a decent window to get to the Delirium part of the card and just nug it down in one shot, which is really just kind of impressive. It's the kind of removal spell that makes you almost think that they could print things that kill an Oko, but that's not.
Imagine if I'm trying to think now how easy it would be to like race to Delirium before turn 3, or I guess before turn 2 in some cases.
Yeah,
just
it would now.
No, that's a pipe dream. But one less serious aspect of this deck that really tickles my fancy is the pair of the Kamigawa legendary lands, Shinka and Shizo. And you see the odd Shizo creeping its way into decks, and that one has snuck many a Merit Lage across the battle lines in its time. Shinka is a card that you basically never see. But it is funny that with Ragavan as this kind of a flagship legend, there are, I don't want to say good reasons, but there are at least reasons to put that card in your deck these days.
Yeah, I actually believe I started seeing Shinka in the Obosh decks as well, is what I've been looking at recently.
Okay.
Which also have Ragavan, but it's kind of awesome to see a lot more of that card when it's just like one of those things that has always been like, it's nice. I've given my Zozu first strike. Actually, I think again, to quote the Receivables, there's Patrick Sullivan talking about giving his Zozu an ability with it and not even remembering what the ability was. So if that gives you an idea of Shinka's lineage of doing important things on the battlefield, it's nice that it might actually do something for once.
Yeah, there's a Mike Flores anecdote from the time where he like frantically called up one of his testing partners to beg them to cut the Shinka from their deck because at the time the legendary rule was different, and so if a Shinka in play and they played a Shinka, both of those would just cancel each other out in some like antimatter explosion, and both of you would be down a land. And it's like, well, okay, maybe that's acceptable with the Minamos or the Shizos that only show up in these control mirrors, but the aggro decks play Shinka, and letting the aggro decks strip mine you for free with their own copy is a disaster, only to be reassured that, yeah, we already know that, we cut the Shinka from our deck long ago. But that's a window into a different time where you had to care about different things.
Yeah, the old Jite my Jite thing. Just weird times.
Yes. But some interesting times going on in Modern here, and a healthy bounty here for Nonsense of the Week once we get there. We chided you all last week for not doing your part there, but you really stepped up to the plate this week, so job well done on that front.
Yeah, and I think it might just be worth kind of summarizing the like major macro archetypes we're repeatedly seeing at this point, because a lot of the top finishes across these events have condensed. You're basically the best decks in the format is you have Amulet, the Asmore Urza Saga stack, various Dragon's Rage Channeler, Ragavan, aggressively positioned mid-range decks, which I think even includes the Jeskai Stoneblade deck, because it's just trying to steal games with cheap threats, but also has control cards. Yawgmoth has been doing well, and then like also in that sort of tier 1.5 below those top three is just like various Flicker, Solitude, Grief shells. More Solitude than Grief, but there are some that just have both. And then the fringe decks that we keep seeing are kind of the 4-color control pile with Ren and 6, whether that's like Urza Saga or Time Warps or Niv Mizzet, whatever you really want it to be. Dredge, Urza's Tower still around somehow. Enchantress and Mill. Anything else in there that like you can expect to see reliably, you think?
I think that covers most of it, yeah. And within those broad umbrellas, there's stuff which maybe fits kind of uneasily on the seam. So stuff like the old school Paris decks, how coextensive are they with the kind of Delver style, more blue heavy Motide region decks that are popping up? Unclear. And those are the kind of distinctions that you really need to pay attention to, where if your interaction lines up well against one of those decks but not against the other, then you can easily get blindsided if you prepare for the wrong half of that category, so to speak. One trend that you highlighted and have kept highlighting over the past few weeks is the format at large seems quite hostile to creatures in general. So you have Asmore doing a lot of work, just shooting down everything in sight. You have Solitude, but also Fury, which is a card that has impressed me more and more over the past week, picking up a lot. And in general, these ephemerate shells are quite hostile to creatures. And then you also have the Yawgmoth deck, which can go off in a kind of deterministic sense, but it can also just stop any creature from really doing anything on the board before that point. And so you have highlighted the importance of not making yourself more vulnerable to that than you have to. And so I thought that suggestion of the banned Miracles deck was quite heads up. It is striking, though, that all of these strategies that are hostile to creatures themselves are also very creature heavy. And so you have these weird dynamics when those decks face off against each other. But it does also it makes me want to chase that dream of, is there a deck which just fights on a completely different axis altogether? And so that's where you start to think about like Classic Tron or your Ad Nauseam under its new guise with Profane Tutor, or I actually think the Inverter deck might be perfectly positioned at the moment, where you're kind of sidestepping most of those fights. And it's weird to say that when Inverter as a 6/6 flyer is maybe more vulnerable than it has been in a long time. But I think Motide Regent might be a fantastic addition to that shot. And just in terms of what that deck is trying to do in the format, I think this is a better time for that than it has been, even when Musasabi was putting it on the map.
That's also a deck that inherently wants access to Relic of Progenitus, which just already makes me think it could be an Urza Saga deck, and then you just have another Saga hybrid combo deck.
Oh, God. Yeah, well, then I will add that one to the docket. Yeah, no more Eldrazi Temples trying to, turn 3 out my Inverter. We got a better colorless land in the mix now.
Yeah. The kind of duality of like creatures are punished so hard, but they're also the best thing to do in the format is just really weird.
Yeah, and even the Amulet decks, that is a creature deck in most of its guises, and that's why you see people looking for backup plans for that deck that don't lean as hard into that weakness, whether it's this Through the Reach package or Khan the Great Creator, or just something to where you don't have to slog through a wall of Asmore Activations and Unholy Heats every round.
Yeah. And I think the other thing worth mentioning is that because the other cards are like, we've received a lot of cards that are more broadly good against creatures with Modern Horizons 2. And that's kind of made, I think, like Lightning Bolt and Fatal Push's stock is at an all-time low because they're just more narrow. Like, people are still playing a bunch of Lightning Bolt because Lightning Bolting your opponent is also pretty valuable. But like, I don't really know why I would want to put Fatal Push in a deck. Like, something would have had to go wrong with, I don't know, what colors did I choose? What was I doing at that point?
I guess you chose this Ragdos Ragavan deck, right? Where you also have Lightning Bolt and Unholy Heat, and that's the interaction which you kind of sign up for in those colors, and that may be why actually we see some of those decks being effectively Mardu just for Prismatic Ending. We in the mocks, Patsy Sanchez played this Shadow deck where you still have Shadow and a Scourge of the Skyclaves, and the white there was just for Prismatic Ending. That that card is strong enough in the format right now that those are the lengths you're willing to go to. He also, interestingly, had 3 copies of actual Terminate in the format, where if you have this weird patchwork where there's a bunch of removal, all of which is mostly versatile, but it misses a crucial 20% of the format, Terminate does one thing, and it does it just unconditionally and very well. And so maybe that kind of more expensive but hard removal is worth looking at too.
Yeah, at the very least, Terminate is the thing that is going to kill Murktide Regent, which is pretty important right now.
Yeah, kills Murktide Regent, kills Primeval Titan. So yeah, good to have just a clean answer to all of those things, especially as we have these results from the Sunday top 8. That challenge was won by Hamuda on Hammer Time, Hamuda Time, where that deck has been popping up time and time again. And even despite this increase in instant speed removal, to the point where we're both coming in here and saying, I would not want to be on one of these creature decks, this seems like one of the creature decks that doesn't want to see removal. That is the dictionary definition there, and yet still the same player even putting out these results week after week.
Yeah, I still have no idea what to think about the Hammer deck. It's I don't know. I just remember playing it into spot removal plus aggressive plans and just being really unimpressed with how it fell apart. But maybe Urza Saga solves a lot of that. The Sunday Challenge also has our one kind of super rogue deck that we're still waiting on a list for, but it's worth talking about. There's an Elementals deck in the top 8 of this Sunday. And just based on the description of it as Elementals, I don't actually know which Elementals deck it is because there's multiple people, like there's 2 completely different builds of Risen Reef right now.
Yeah, and there's also the complete wildcard, which is the Glimpse of Tomorrow Risen Reef deck, where instead of trying to high roll with stuff like Emrakul and Arcana of Cruelty, Iona, whatever, instead we're building this deck which kind of is more of an engine deck where you go off once and then you're drawing a bunch of cards, making a ton of mana, going off again. We have Goblin Dark Dwellers to flip, so you can recast the Glimpse once you have built your board up, doubled your number of permanents. And this deck, you have Seasoned Pyromancer, Risen Reef, Omnath, Locus of Creation, which is a great way to turn a Glimpse into a bunch of mana to unload your hand past that point. So that shell, I think, is a really promising new iteration of that deck. But then, as you say, if you're just playing fair, so to speak, with elementals, there's a list which I think Caleb Durwood was championing for a while, where we're going up the curve to Titania, which is an elemental that makes more elementals and is very powerful in its own right, but especially in conjunction with the gold Omnath, the 4-color Omnath, where it's the perfect use of that burst of mana. Both incentivize you to play a bunch of fetch lands. And then you have the Ephemerate Elementals deck, which uses every color of the rainbow when it comes to Omnath, because we're pitching that card to your choice of Endurance, Subtlety, Solitude, and Fury all at once. And then we have Ephemerate tying the room together, making sure that all of your pitch elementals can do double duty. But that card is also just so good at protecting your Risen Reef, getting another trigger from that as well, or protecting your Omnath, getting another card there out of the bargain. So this is almost the platonic ideal of the kind of Ephemerate Evoke deck that really uses the type line to great effect too.
Yeah, Flickering an Omnath is notably just like even more broken than you think it is, because you draw a card, but then you also reset your landfall. So you can actually make a bunch of mana and then like with Risen Reef make even more mana and just like really go off, which is kind of wild.
Omnath is like the original version of venturing into the dungeon, except you just have a clean progression through every single time, and there's no challenge. So there's no monster lurking in the shadows. You just get to the end and get your guaranteed jackpot.
Yeah. You just every single room is just even more treasure chests.
Right. It's just like a raid, basically. So this is. I think these shells are certainly eye-catching. I don't know how much long-term resilience they have, but I think this plays into that dynamic of the Ephemerate Solitude decks being well positioned right now. And with Flamekin Harbinger that we see in this deck really tying the room together, that can get what is maybe the central card in the Risen Reef, can get you any one of those Evoke Elementals. The Mythics, I mean. It can also get these sideboard Evoke Elementals like Foundation Breaker, which is a great card in an Urza Saga format, a great Ephemerate target in its own right, and the discount there, the 2 mana, as opposed to something like Reclamation Sage, or previously you would have this weird split of Wismere and Ingot Chewer and just hope to have enough of the right one, and this covers all of your bases instead. So this deck really has a lot going for it, and I think as people refine this more and more, you will see a lot of it, because if you are playing any kind of value game, this deck just goes way over the top. And if you have some specific weakness to a card like, Foundation Breaker, Solitude, and so on, well, this deck has consistent access to those effects and makes better use out of them than a lot of its competition.
Yeah, I'm excited for the future of this deck. I'm skeptical that your all creatures deck like this is going to be the best choice in the most hostile meta against creatures that you could probably imagine, but it at the least is going to be very fun to flip cards off the top of your library.
Yeah, maybe the argument there is, removal spells versus Mold Drifters is never a winning fight, typically, but those removal spells nowadays, they're all either hyper-efficient or they are repeatable. It's Ephemerating Solitude, it's Yawgmoth, it's Asmore, right? So it's not like it's a clean 1-for-1 trade, and if you turn that into a 2-for-1, then you're getting a leg up on them. There is a card across the table that essentially invalidates everything you have going on, and you remove that or you die.
Yeah, I will say the Ephemerate Solitude thing is probably a little dicier than you think it is against this Elementals deck. I found that it was kind of hard to set up the full-on 3-for-1 because often like them just controlling those 3 creatures would mean I had died before the Solitude Ephemerate thing would happen. But maybe it's like coming close to being able to mop it up at the right time. I have to play some games.
Yeah, there's also the fact that a decent amount of your white card count is taken up by Ephemerate and Solitude, and so you need the third white card there to tie the room together. And this deck, in the 2-drop slots, I think this is why you see both Unsettled Mariner and Voice of Resurgence, where they're in the right color for what you want to be doing, but also both of their abilities kind of protect your attempt at some kind of Ephemerate combo, where either it costs more mana for the opponent to interact with it, or you're getting an elemental back from that exchange, which in any other deck is not that impressive, and that's why Voice of Resurgence, for the most part, is kind of an embarrassing card. But in this specific deck, where it's very easy to cast, and it triggers your Risen Reef, and if they try to kill your Risen Reef, well, you're triggering the Risen Reef again with a new elemental, then this is actually the one home for that card, I think.
Yep, it just Risen Reefs for days and days, and whatever you want to do to make sure that you can keep on doing that is what this deck wants to do.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the more fringe decks from certainly the Insight esports list, but maybe from the outer regions of the challenge too. One thing I wanted to highlight was this Sultai Infect deck with just 8 Hierarchs. So we have 4 Noble Hierarch, 4 Ignoble Hierarch, and that effect. You mentioned how discovering that back in 2012 was what really leveled up that iteration of Infect, and now I guess we're kind of doubling down on that here again. But also note that this deck doesn't even have Glistener Elf, because if the theory is that card is so hard to actually connect with, especially in a format which is preparing to be chump blocking or dealing with Ragavan now, instead you're going up the curve. We've got these evasive 2-drops in Plague Stinger and Blighted Agent, and we have the Phyrexian Crusader, which is a decent amount easier to cast now thanks to Ignoble Hierarch, and then the traditional complement of pump spells in Scale Up, Vines of Vastwood, Mutagenic Growth, Blossoming Defense, Might of Volcrosa. So I don't know how stable this version is compared to other Infect decks, but the willingness to take that bold step and just cutting Glistener Elf entirely, certainly gets my attention.
Yeah, Phyrexian Crusader is looking better and better with Fatal Push falling out of favor, right? If it's not able to be killed by Unholy Heat, or Lightning Bolt, or Asmore, or Prismatic End, what's it dying to?
That is a really good point. It kind of almost has to be the Fatal Pushes or Dismembers, I suppose, that you just don't really see as much of in the format anymore.
Yeah, it might finally be well positioned as opposed to just a 2/2, but I think you do need to pair it with blue cards, like Distortion Strike or similar kinds of effects that actually give you evasion, or maybe Rancor is good enough. I'm not entirely sure there.
Yeah, we do have a Rancor in this list, a good throwback to the standard Infect days, and that's the kind of marginal 5th or 6th pump spell that always kind of gets benched just before the big game. But when you are reorienting your threats in this direction, that card has a specific use that makes it more appealing again.
Yeah, Trample on Phyrexian Crusader is a relevant deal in a way that it is not quite on Blighted Agent, and Phyrexian Crusader tends to survive multiple combats with an aura on it in a way that Glistener Elf really didn't.
I know there was another list from this event that you were quite excited to see, so let's get into that quickly.
Yeah, well, first off, I want to highlight the player, Alexander Gordon Brown. Anyone who kind of paid attention to the SCG Tour Online last summer and fall might recognize that name as someone who's just kind of always like pushing a level ahead on iterating archetypes. Really, this Insight Esports event had a lot of really great players in it for the size, like multiple MPL Rivals members, like Gabe Nassif was in the top 4, Jim Davis in the top 8, bunch more like SCG Tour Online regulars who put up, great stats over the last, part of 2020. Just like a really strong field. But Alexander Gordon Brown, back to this deck, came back with an old classic, and this is Pyromancer Ascension combo, with the combo being that you are enabling a Pyromancer Ascension, and then you set up this loop where you are Noxious Revivaling another Noxious Revival and a Manamorphose, because you have the Pyromancer Ascension copying the Revival, and then the Manamorphose gets copied, so you draw 2 cards, and I think you need 2 of each spell, but it creates Infinite Storm and Infinite Mana, if I remember the combo correctly.
Yeah, this may be the single most painful combo to execute on Magic Online of all time. And so maybe that limits its representation in this online-only modern universe nowadays, although clearly not enough to keep Alexander Golden Brown down here. But this deck also has Aria Flame as the kind of payoff for casting a bunch of spells. So you have your 8 combo enchantments, so to speak, and we have some transformational threats in the sideboard here. We've got Thing in the Ice for when they take out all of their creature removal, and then also Blood Moon as an enchantment that wins the game by itself, but which you don't have to put any other work into when that card is good. But interesting features here include 4 copies of Expressive Iteration. Like we've seen that card show up in basically any Izzet shell that can accommodate it. And that's one thing that these spell-heavy decks, thinking back to the Izzet Phoenix days and so on, they really lack just an actual way to get up in cards. And that was notable for those decks where, looting was card disadvantage in theory, and then you were discarding a bunch of cards to other things. And so it was shockingly easy to just run out of material with those decks, and you didn't have a treasure cruise or something anymore to gas back up. And Iteration does actually give you that. And notably, it's also a great target for the 4 copies of Finale of Promise that we see in this deck, where Finale with Aria, that's the way to kind of get this sudden burst of damage that finishes the game, where Finale itself is a trigger, and then it gives you 2 more triggers on top. But Finale with Expressive Iteration, you now have a kind of big sorcery that you want to be recasting again. And so you get up to Finale for 2, getting back, let's say, a Ritual or a Manamorphose, as well as an Iteration. That's a great use of 4 mana, and you're more than happy to do that. So I think those 2 cards working very well in tandem there. And then, of course, Finale with the Thing in the Ice in the sideboard makes it that much easier to flip that card as well.
Yeah, and I think that it's worth noting that this deck's Ascension and Aria are the actual kill conditions and their permanents. So I think there's a little bit more proactive sticking value than actual Storm, and then from there you can afford to play these turns with Expressive Iteration where you just get that 2-for-1 value of just casting 2 things and don't really care about oh, well, I needed a cantrip to set up this specific thing in 2.5 turns so that I can make actual Storm to, Past in Flames. It's just no, I'm casting spells and I'll get there when I get there.
Yeah, it is worth noting that this is an Urza Saga format, and people are playing a lot of cards like, Force of Vigor, Foundation Breaker, Wear Tear, and so on. And even the generic good removal spells like a Prismatic Ending or Portable Hull coming in with Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, both of those give decks which otherwise could not cleanly answer a card like Pyromancer Ascension a way to do that. There was a point back in the day where you would play a Pyromancer Ascension and you would see your opponent slump in their chair because that card was sticking around, and unless you died very quickly, once that card was online, you were off to the races. That isn't so much the case anymore, and so that's another case for having this resiliency in the form of Iteration and Finale and being able to play that kind of longer game.
Yeah. Anything else stand out for you from these results, aside from these nice little spice decks? Magic Online Challenge from Saturday was pretty standard, at least from what I saw. A bit of Kelmaster P innovation, but not anything huge away from the major archetypes.
Yeah, well, even just in that list, to wrap up there, for Cyborg Poetic Ritual. So I think, first of all, that's a nod to when you want to be a fast Blood Moon deck, and this is another way, alongside the Desperate Rituals, to turbo that out on turn 2. But also, I think you're going to see that card come in elsewhere, where speed is the name of the game, against another combo deck, for example. And so I actually like that, because you don't have that many ritual effects in the format to where you get to choose, or to, you start with your 8 locked in copies and then you load up on more. But seeing, 4 rituals main deck, 4 on the sideboard, you basically never see that in any other context. And so that kind of choice makes you reconsider why. 2 other things that stood out to me this week was, we mentioned the Scurrio combo in Yawgmoth, and a very different Scurrio combo actually showed up in Heliod, so bridging the gap between these 2 creature combo decks. So to refresh people's memory, Scurrio is the 3-mana Evolve card from MH2, and when you put a counter on it, you create a 1/1 token. And so the additional combo was with Ivy Lane Denizen, just you create a creature that puts a +1/+1 counter on, and you just rinse and repeat. In the Heliod deck, you see it alongside Heliod, of course, but also Auriok Champion or Soul Warden in one of these lists, where now you have Heliod in play, you gain life somehow. You put a counter on your Scurrio, that then creates a token that triggers your Soul Warden, it gains you life. That triggers Heliod, which puts a counter on the Scurrio, and rinse and repeat. And so this replaces the Ranger Captain Walking Ballista package, which, if you think Ranger Captain is not a great card to be playing anymore, then that kind of makes a lot of sense. And then that opens the door for stuff like Call of Calling to make its way into the deck, giving that additional redundancy. So don't know if this is a better build of Heliod or if Heliod is where you want to be right now, but I thought that was a neat innovation.
Yeah, that was kind of cool. I question the need to add a 3-card combo to your 2-card combo deck. But it doesn't really cost a lot, right? It's just Scurrio and cards you would normally play, so it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, and it's getting to the point where there are so many kind of disjoint Heliod combos in the deck that if you don't have this 2 or 3 card combo, you probably have another one, or one of them is within realistic reach thanks to Collected Company has always been in the deck, but now the additional consistency via Call of Calling as well. Scurrio also just an interesting card for the fair game plan here, where works decently well with Conclave Mentor, among other things. And then we have Gaffney Township in this deck, where you get this kind of it's a similar scaling to the like animation module Steel Overseer kind of stuff in Hardened Scales, where you activate Township, a counter goes on the yoke, you make another token, and so next turn, that token is getting a counter, and then you're adding to your board, and it just kind of scales in a nice way there.
Yeah, all good stuff there. I really want to... I should go back and play some more with the Heliod deck these days, because it feels like I don't really understand why it's not a huge part of the metagame still. Is it just because Asmore is so... Is Asmore even that good against it? I'm not even sure. Like, yeah.
Yeah, most of those Asmore decks not well equipped to beat Infinite Life either, as far as I can tell. So there does seem to be a hole in the format for that strategy nowadays. The other thing that caught my eye from the leagues was the kind of Mox Amber Legends aggro deck. So this iteration, Ragavan, a great addition there, and this one being played by Golden Wan, if I'm pronouncing that right. So you still have that suite of Kithian and Zogo Bellstriker and Isamaru, which this deck doesn't even have. We've got Figure of Destiny, Giver of Runes instead. Ragavan, a tremendous addition to that shell. And then we're rounding this out with Solitude, 2 different Thalias, Guardian of Thraben and Heretic Cathar, and then a Stoneforge Mystic package as well. And building these decks is an interesting exercise because you have to decide, are you using the burst of mana from Mox Amber to jump up the curve and work towards some more expensive payoff like Urza's Rodinous Blast, is a card that you often used to see in these decks? Or are you using Mox Amber to cast a 1-drop on turn 1 and then immediately cast another 1-drop to follow that up and really push this aggressive curve? And so this list is kind of still figuring out where it stands on that spectrum, but an interesting concept, definitely. And it breaks my heart to see, this deck can find room for the Iganto Castle, but this deck with 25 different legends can't find room for the Shinka? Come on.
Well, you see, all the Thalias already have First Strike, and...
Sure.
Yeah, you don't get to First Strike twice. Yeah, it may also be just like the balance of mana in the deck, right? These decks tend to be like heavier white, and there's like just enough red to cast the Ragavans early.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would want to see the Shinka. Realistically, I want to see the 4th Stoneforge Mystic. I don't think that's a card that you can really do as a half measure. But beyond that, I like a lot of what this deck is doing. I think what would really compel me to play it is if there was some cheap, more cheap disruptive legends, in the same way that, in humans, you get to leverage both the human type line and also the disruptive effect of, Thalia, Meddling Mage, and so on. Kind of harder to do that with legends. We have Kataki in the sideboard, which is good for that. And then obviously the 8-pack of Thalias. But I would want to see a bit more of that if possible. And then also, there isn't really a good legendary lord, so to speak. There's no Thalia's Lieutenant, Mayor of Averbrook equivalent for your Legends deck, and the options that do exist are all either often the commander sets and not in Modern, or it's stuff like Day of Destiny, which is just so far up the curve that I don't think you can justify it. But if something like that gets printed, then I think the shell becomes quite compelling.
Yeah, I agree that those are the two things lacking. You need a way to either become a better aggressive deck or become a better disruptive deck. Because humans is kind of outclassing you on both of those angles, right? Aside from having, it's like you've got Mox Amber and then what else?
Yeah. So that covers a lot of what other people got right this weekend. We'll take a break and we'll come back with what we got very, very wrong.
As hard as it is to believe, with us still processing Modern Horizons 2, another preview season is just around the corner for Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. You can get started at level 1 of this new set with sealed pre-orders from StarCityGames.com. Order draft boosters, set boosters, collector boosters, bundles, or commander decks now, and they will ship out right when the set releases on July 23rd. Visit StarCityGames.com/previews today to order your sealed product, and keep an eye on that page as more cards are revealed for updates on Adventures in the Forgotten Realms singles.
All right, and we're back here to engage in a period of healthy self-reflection, and I will let you start with that self-reflection here, Ari. Where do we want to begin with this?
Yeah, I guess, so I kind of want to talk about the top 8 that I had listed off a couple weeks ago. Top 8, what I had listed as my top 8 cards from Modern Horizons 2 when the set was coming out. Now, to be fair, this list skipped the incarnations, and as a bit of a spoiler, my current top 8 list has 3 of those, I think. So, like, it's kind of hard to say, like, oh, well, I backfilled 3 cards or whatever, but there were a lot of misses. I did have Urza Saga at number 1, which I think is, like, that's good. We got it. It's great. That's the one card that sticks around. And I'll skip down to the end because I think, like, if I dropped those 3 incarnations, Abundant Harvest is a card that would have made my updated top 8. It's not seeing a ton of play right now, but it's really, really good. And it allows you to restructure decks in a lot of different ways. I've talked about it. But the other 6 cards are just like, just kind of, I think, maybe misses. Like, Persist was my number 2. I have kind of learned since this discussion that the redundancy issues with Persist are a little too much of an issue. And then once you start down the incarnation road, one of the things I learned with the Grief Solitude decks is that, like, all the Ephemerates and Malakir Rebirths and Persist, they're all the same card. It doesn't matter. Like, who cares that it's Persist instead of Dode? So, like, in the spots where Persist actually has redundancy, it being Persist as opposed to the other one is, like, almost a drawback. Like, the upside in Persist is that you can pursue this other kind of, like, non-resilient, non-redundant plan of reanimating an Archon. Whereas, like, the upside of the other ones is just, like, doing your main thing better.
Yeah, I do think that Persist, the obvious application, of course, is in those reanimated decks, pushing that as hard as possible. I kind of wonder if the more fertile ground and the more unexplored space is some kind of just fair Persist strategy. And maybe it is, maybe Grief is part of that, but this isn't the tagline of the deck is, oh, look, it's the Grief Ephemerate deck we were all worried about from day one. It's maybe more of just using Persist to get back good value creatures on the cheap, but then I don't even know what that looks like. And the inbuilt safety valve of non-legendary excludes some of the most appealing targets there. So yeah, I'm not sure what the obvious home for that card is going to be.
Yeah, it's the kind of card that in 10 years might be, really, really absurd, but right now just isn't cutting it. That kind of applies to another card that I had on this list, jumping down to number 8, Blazing Rootwalla. Little dude's just waiting for his moment. It's kind of where it's at. The Rootwalla decks have been tried. There's some Rootwalla Vendrine stuff being tried, but it's just not really happening right now compared to the much more powerful discard interactions with Asmore.
Yeah, the initial Asmore decks were those Burning Inquiry, Blazing Rootwalla, Vengevine decks, and those decks, I think, have been kind of outmoded by other Asmore decks, and then are also vulnerable to those trends in the format where you really do not want to play against Solitude with anything resembling that deck. And so, Rootwalla, clearly very good at what it does, but I don't know if the enablers are there to make it work. And that was what held me back on just the madness stuff in general with the set is, there were some interesting kind of madness adjacent cards there, but the pieces just aren't there to tie it together yet. And I think that's still true. And like with Persist, this is a card that you file away, and then there's a seemingly innocuous card on a spoiler in a set 2 years from now, and that's when you're ready to hit the ground running, building that deck again because the missing piece has finally come.
Yeah, I think we can then move on to talking about. Do you want to talk about the cards on your list that I didn't have? That I don't know if you still have them. So you had Grist and Imperial Recruiter as the unique cards on your list. Did either of those survive to your re-ranked top 8?
They didn't. Grist has shown up, but more as a one-off that you get to free roll in your Yawgmoth deck with 8 creature tutors and a bunch of undying creatures. More so than a card that you build a deck around, because this is what is making your kind of a Jund mid-range deck go to the next level. So, great card, but it seems to be more of a role player than anything else. And maybe its job has kind of been done better by other cards at this point, where this stifling effect on creatures that we keep talking about. Grist is another card that does a similar thing, but if those cards are doing the job so successfully that there's less need for that now, then what is Grist meant to be doing? Because it sure as hell is not racing the Amulet Titan decks or anything else.
Yeah, I played some with Grist this last week in large quantities, and I was not super impressed. I actually think the big delta between this and Doretti Iconoclast, with a black red Doretti, whatever the name of it is, which is like absurd in cube. I think the big delta is that the strict creature fodder on Grist is like a real big drawback, and I don't think that the Yawgmoth deck is like the one deck that really supports it, but it's really hard to just like build an arbitrary green-black cards deck that supports that really well. And it is nice. Like, Grist has a lot of weird interactions. Like, it just costs 3 through Athalia because it's a creature on the stack. But I don't think it makes up for it with a super powerful shell.
That being said, there is a Grist deck in strong contention for Nonsense of the Week once you get down there. And so we'll see if that changes the evaluation at all. As for Imperial Recruiter, I still think it's an excellent card, and Andrew Brown is back to his tricks with a nonsense contender featuring that card. But I think it's just more a case of finding a good shell for it. So we have these kind of blinky creature soup decks with a bunch of ephemerates, and maybe you're a Call of Calling, Restoration Angel, Kiki Jiki deck, or God knows what. Maybe Urian finds its way in there somewhere, and you often see some recruiters just doing what Recruiter does in those shells, but so far there hasn't been, a combo deck based around Yawgmoth, for example. Like I saw Tom Ross trying to build a kind of Jund build of Yawgmoth that had Recruiter to find Yawgmoth and chain into that. But by and large, we haven't seen that use of Recruiter, as there is one creature that my deck is built around, maybe named after, and Recruiter is 4 more copies of that. And I think that's the application that you need to see for it to be putting its weight here.
Yeah, I have been very impressed with Imperial Recruiter whenever my opponents have played it, in large part because it is, it's been in these ephemerate shells, and it's such an effective card to ephemerate. But yeah, I don't think it's like, it's not one of the best cards in the set. It's just doing good long game work in a set full of cards that do better long game work or do significantly better short game work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where do you want to start on the 4 cards that we have overlapped with that may or may not remake the top 8? Those are Shardless Agent, Ignoble Hierarch, Sanctum Prelate, and Counterspell.
Let's talk about Counterspell, a card which I think actually is picking up a little bit of traction here, but it's not in the blue control shells where I feared it kind of homogenizing everything. It's actually in these tempo strategies where that's either leading into a Murktide region or defending the Murktide region for the 1 or 2 attacks you need for that thing to close out the game.
Yeah, it's a good card. It's just not really... I don't know how much it's changing relative to that card being Mana Leak. I mean, it's obviously better, but like the strategy is mostly the same.
Yeah, if I look at the, let's say, the Jeskai Monkey Blade decks with Ragavan and Stoneforge Mystic and so on, which have been doing a lot of work, those decks tend to have Counterspell, but I don't know how much less winning they're doing if you just force them to replace their Counterspells with Mana Links. It might make their mana a little bit better, if anything. So, yeah, I think it's definitely an improvement, but maybe more of a marginal improvement than I initially gave it credit for.
Yeah, still among the good cards of the set, but not a transformational card.
I will say as well that there are times against like Amulet Titan, for example, especially in their double Amulet draws with Saga, where sometimes they make just a giant amount of mana, which could easily plow through a mana leak, but is still stopped in its tracks by a counterspell. But other stuff which, where that delta is significant, so against Tron, for example, we have not seen that much Tron, and that's a matchup where having counterspell over mana leak is a really, really big deal. So if that pillar of the format returns in a big way, then, maybe counterspell as an upgrade shines through more. But as it stands, it's, just quietly ticking along, doing its job, not drawing much attention to itself.
Yeah, I also want to talk about Shardless Agent in a similar fashion. Because I think a lot of these Shardless Agent decks, if you just put Ardent Plea in them instead of Shardless Agent, the ones that are like Violent Outburst plus Agent, I don't know how much worse they get. Like, it almost feels like the Crashing Footfalls decks, the biggest improvements they got were outside of the Shardless Agent realm. It was stuff like being able to put Fire Ice in your deck, and Subtlety being another free spell.
Yeah, I figured that the redundancy on Shardless Agent would matter more, where now you get up to 12 of the 3-mana good Cascade spells. No shade being thrown at Demonic Dread here, but come on. But instead, it feels like these decks have just consolidated around. We still want 8, but now we're in 3 colors instead of 4, and Agent is a little bit better than a Simic Ardent Plea would have been, but not by that much. But as you say, it's the free spells and Fire Ice, and just that package being so fundamentally sound, more so than Agent itself doing anything unique.
Yeah, definitely an upgrade, but not like a huge upgrade in any sense.
Yeah, I do think, though, that kind of redundant Cascade space is a little bit unexplored. And so some of the Marks lists, where there were 3 out of 8 Crashing Footfalls decks, I believe, and 2 of the Zoomers, who may or may not have worked together, I'm not sure, but they had the 4-color setup with Ardent Plea as additional Cascade spells, and then Teferi as a good mirror breaker for the Cascade matchups. And I think that shell has a lot going for it. The other thing, too, is in the third Cascade deck, the Glimpse of Tomorrow deck, Shardless Agent just being a permanent comes up a decent amount, I think. But then, Ardent Plea does as well. But that is a spot where the 2/2 body maybe does do some work.
Yeah, the difference between 8 power and 10 power certainly matters in the Footfalls deck. But again, it's marginal, like the Counterspell Mana Leak thing.
Yeah, so then there's Ignoble Hierarch, which has maybe made less of a mark than I expected. But I actually think this is one of the things propelling Yawgmoth to being, a gimmick deck, and then maybe not a gimmick deck, to solidly now just being a pillar of the format that shows up over and over, where that deck had a fairly disastrous mana base before, and that's been upgraded a little bit. But specifically, the scrappy games where you couldn't stick a Yawgmoth for whatever reason, you had to get the job done with Strangaroo Geist and Garalth's Messenger, that is actually substantially easier to do now, in my experience, with Ignoble Hierarch in the mix.
Yeah, it's a slight upgrade on Birds of Paradise, but not a lot. The decks that really maximize the Exalted haven't really popped up. I think part of that is just because red and black, as opposed to blue and white, are colors that are not inherently as aggressive. You're not building the same kind of like humans beatdown decks in Jund the way that you were with Noble Hierarch. Therefore, the Exalted extra damage just comes up less.
I did wonder if this card would show up in some of these kind of Ponza-style decks, or just the red-green mid-range decks, where, those decks could have played Noble Hierarch, but tapping for red was a really big deal there for stuff like Seasoned Pyromancer, or, going up the curve with these double red cards. And I thought with that, they have a big interest in jumping from 1 to 3, and especially if something like Obosh is in the mix. And then also with Ragavan on the table too, just giving Exalted to that card sometimes really helps to force it through. You can attack into their Young Wolf now, which was not something you could do previously, or stuff like that. So maybe you could see it show up there. And then also, if this black-green Infect deck does make some noise, then Ignoble Hierarch is a really big deal in that situation.
Yeah, the Infect deck's definitely the peak. I actually think Ragavan is part of the problem with Hierarch in the red-green decks. It's just like, why do I need to play a Mana Dork when I can just play a Mana Dork that's also a threat? And similarly, Noble Hierarch and Ignoble Hierarch and Birds, have just become secondary to the Arbor Elf Utopia Sprawl duo in these decks.
Yeah, and I think there are certainly diminishing returns on how much of that you can do, and so you already see Ragavan as another good one-drop in those Gruul decks, which previously, if you didn't have either your 4 Arbor Elves or your 4 Utopia Sprawls, your hand just didn't really do anything for quite a long time, and now you have another Premier one-drop, and so, this other kind of less Premier one-drop that's showing up just doesn't get the same audition it would have had before, maybe. Let's go up here to a card which was a shared number 1 on both of our lists, and I have to think is going to be, if not at the top, at least close to it still, Urza Saga. And I think this is one that we actually nailed in contrast to some of our other mistakes.
This card is bananas. I don't know what else to say besides that.
And I get the sense this is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the homes that it can show up in, where, we're used to seeing it in the food decks and the amulet decks and so on by this point, but this card is so flexible and so versatile that we're going to see it show up in a ton of other spaces. And we're at the point where, if you think back to when people were deliberately putting Oko in these very ill-fitting shells just as a to prove a point about how powerful that card was. So you saw Oko burn, for example, or Oko, fill in the blank. We're starting to see a little bit of that with Urza Saga, where there was a kind of Golgari midrange deck in the mold of, Jabberwocky, Soulmalka, whatever, just with Urza Saga, because it turns out that in your deck that's trading card for cards, having something which makes 2 big threats and then finds a kind of surgical answer for whatever is really good. And it turns out that putting a enchantment land in your graveyard for free and potentially an artifact in your graveyard for free in your Tarmogoyf deck has a lot of appeal too. So that somehow is a new home for this card. Or in the Prowess decks, I saw a Prowess deck that 5-0'd, I think, with Dragonspace Chandler just surveying Urza Saga for very sudden delirium activation. So this card is just ridiculous. And I think when we eventually get to the inevitable ban discussion, this card will be forefront among that. Personally, I don't think this card has reached the point where action needs to be taken, but if anything does, it's going to be this card as opposed to anything else. And I will say, Ragavan is not that card. I already see people murmuring about Ragavans and if those are a safe investment, or do they need to be worried about those cards being banned before they even have a chance to play with them. If any card meets that description, Ragavan is not it. You do not have to worry about that.
I think if you're a legacy player, you might have to worry about Ragavan, but that has more to do with a deliberate unwillingness to ban cards that are, supporting the Ragavan archetypes in that format.
We can have the banned days and legacy debate when there's a slow news week or whatever, but for now, I think your Ragavans are a safe investment.
Yeah, and I think this kind of neatly wraps into why we both had Sanctum Prelate on our old top 8s. That card is just so bad when it's like, oh, I need to stop enchantment land that doesn't use the stack, and I need to stop a creature that's going to kill all of my creatures. So I can't name a relevant number with this Sanctum Prelate, or
But yeah, right now, every deck in Modern basically is either an Urza Saga deck, or it's a creature deck setting out to murder other creature decks. And so Sanctum Prelate doesn't really have a clear home there. The one thing that could change that is if people do go to that next level and find the spell-based combo deck that is sidestepping all of that altogether. And honestly, one of the arguments for that deck right now is no one's playing Sanctum Prelate. So if that changes, then the other half of that could change too.
Yeah, so it does sound like a lot of these cards we had shared on our list ended up being good, but just not important. Is not transformative, not something that is really pushing the format in any direction. Would you even have Ignoble Hierarch in your updated top 8?
I think I would, but it's going to be on the fringes as a 7 or an 8. I think more so than the kind of guaranteed hit that it was before.
Yeah, I think that's about where I was. I think I had it in the discussion for my 8th slot as well.
One card that neither of us had, even as an honorable mention, I believe, was Dragonspace Chandler. And that was a pretty severe miss. I don't know how to diagnose that, because I remember looking at the card and thinking, all right, well, this thing is incredibly powerful. Gonna have some prowess decks, already maybe the best deck in Modern. Those are gonna have an interest in this. But for some reason, that didn't translate that into just being given a slot on the ranking somehow.
Yeah, I think this is a very important total miss to talk about before we get into full re-ranks. I think I missed on it because I don't actually. I think that I missed the more this and Ragavan as well. Both of these, like the shift to a more fair deck that has a lot of the same power that the prowess decks have. I think is just something I missed on. And I think that's kind of a systemic issue I've had where I've biased towards being interested in the aggressive side of the prowess decks. I think that this also reflects back onto Strixhaven and the failure of Clever Lumimancer to actually make a huge dent on the format. And that's just because it is better to be a deck that is potentially as aggressive as the full-on prowess decks, but with more resiliency than it is. It's more important to do that than it is to just be the all-in prowess deck, because once you're going that road, you may as well be a Niv Magus Elemental deck.
Yeah, I do think another part of that puzzle is Ragavan itself, and it's funny to think that when all of this shakes out, the innocuous uncommon may be better than the obscenely expensive mythic rare that people are scared is going to get banned or clamoring to get banned. But this may be another, Psychotar Shadow Mage Infiltrator situation, right? Where they're kind of competing for the same space, but the less overtly good one ends up being popular. I think in this case, the two of them end up complementing each other pretty well, where once you have an additional 8 good red 1-drops, that opens up so much room in terms of how you can build these aggressive decks now, where you're not wedded to having to play a bunch of spells that you don't really want to cast just to support a prowess engine, or Goblin Guide, which is a great card for what it does, but more narrow in terms of what shells it fits in. Now you just get to have these cards which are great basically across the board and at most phases of the game. Certainly more so in the case of Chandler than Ragavan. But the Ragdos Lurus deck, for example, with Ragavan and Chandler, but also just a bunch of the good fair cards, I don't think that deck could exist without having both of those at the same time in quite the same way.
I mean, it did exist. People just played Swiss Spear and Soulscar Mage. It was a lot worse.
Right, or the Shadow decks where you have Shadow and Scourges of Skyclaves. We're seeing people move away just from the Shadow package in general now, because why jump through all of those hoops when you have these other threats ready to go? But also, if you want to play Shadow, well, now you can seamlessly put those threats in your deck, and now you can have Ragdos Shadow that does deal damage consistently to enable Scourge of the Skyclaves, and, when you turn on your Shadow, it's still fantastic. But when you don't have those kind of marquee threats, well, you still have Chandler and Ragavan, and you'll take those as a backup plan.
Yeah, they are significant upgrades over, like, maybe this card is a 3/4 on a good turn. It's just like, oh yeah, no, the Dragon's Rage Channeler is a 3/3 that will scry every time you play an interactive spell, and then everything will cascade your way. And then Ragavan is kind of this, I don't want to say it's a must answer on the spot, but you get pretty far ahead when you connect with it.
Yeah, and then you see in the prowess decks, whether it's mono red or blue red, those decks generally don't have an interest in Ragavan, but they will gladly pick up Chandler as as the broken 1-drop 8 to 12 that is enabling that deck's plan too. So Chandler, I think the biggest miss for us collectively, and maybe for the community from the set, but really now discovering what that card can do in so many different shells.
Yeah. I think now is probably time to take a quick ad break, think about that a little bit, and we'll get into our actual updated top 8 rankings for Modern Horizons 2.
All right, folks, we're taking a brief time out here to talk about Scg Premium. And for the low price of just $7.99 a month, which is less than the cost of one collector booster, by the way, here's what you get. 5% off sealed product, 10% off singles, 15% off supplies, and that's everything from sleeves, deck boxes, to binders, and so much more. If you're making a big order to get ready for Paper Magic again, that month of premium just paid for itself. On top of that, you get more content and better content than anywhere else at the best prices. If you're here now with me and Ari and you like what you hear, you can get our weekly columns, but that's only the start. How about the literal world champion, and for my money, the best player of all time, Paolo Vito Damagerosa? How about Pro Tour champions and Mythic champions from Jerry Thompson to Autumn Burchett? We have the best standard player of all time, perhaps, in Brad Nelson, and the best limited mind in the game right now in Sam Black. and so much more. And if one piece of advice from any of us helps you win just one more round in a tournament, well, that month of premium just paid for itself many times over. Get the best discounts and the best content over at starcitygames.com/join-premium. Okay, Ari, so we're back, and let's put our thoughts down on paper here. If we had to go through that exercise again, what would our updated top 8 rankings look like here?
Okay, I'll start with my 8, and I have Prismatic Ending as my 8th card. It just is the good new removal spell, and those always end up being things that change the format in pretty drastic ways. This one in specific is changing kind of the texture of what it means to put a powerful permanent on the battlefield. There was a little bit of this with Abrupt Decay, but Abrupt Decay is a little more prescriptive. Prismatic Ending really is flexible of what you can put it in, and something like Wrenn and 6 is a significantly less safe investment than it was a few months ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for my number 8, if we want to do the same thing of alternating back and forth, I wasn't quite sure where to put Prismatic Ending on my list. I just knew that I wanted it in there, but this seemed like a good spot for it now. So I will echo that, and I'll move up to my number 7. And this is where previously we had this agreement to bundle the Evoke Elemental cycle together, because otherwise they would just be dominating most of the spots on that list. I don't know how true that is anymore. So let's get into how you divided up those.
Yeah, I just put them in this time. I did end up with 3 in my top 8, but it's a lot more interesting of a discussion when they're like, I originally thought that they would be like 3 of the 4 cards from 1 through 5, and now they've ended up being, 3 cards on the lower end, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, you have Fury in here at 7, and that's a card that we said is probably the worst of the cycle during preview season, and it has, I would say, shown up more than subtlety in the past few weeks, and I think it's better, it's maybe more important for the format than Endurance is. My issue with Fury was, what deck really wants it? Where if you look at the pre-MH2 red decks, then Prowess, probably not. Burn, probably not either. Maybe like the red-green mid-range decks, but that's it. As it happens, those red-green mid-range decks are better now, and in part thanks to Fury. There was actually a list that Cave Dan from the Faithless Brewing podcast was 5-0ing a lot with, and if you're a fan of Nonsense of the Week, if that's what draws you to this podcast, then their show is just a whole episode of that, so we recommend checking that out. But that was a deck that had Kiora Behemoth Beckoner, so this is the 3-mana Simic hybrid Planeswalker from War of the Spark, in conjunction with Fury and Titania. So you play Fury, you draw a card back from your Kiora, or Kiora jumps you up to Titania, which is an elemental. It's a 5/3, you're getting a card there, and then a card for each subsequent Titania trigger, so you're just going off, so to speak. So that's just one example of a shell where, this is a deck which is possible now, in part thanks to Fury, and these Ragavan decks where Fury can pitch a second copy of Ragavan that you have no need for to let the first one connect, and typically these are Blood Moon decks where you either have no use for the second Blood Moon, or maybe no use for the first Blood Moon, and so that's a great card to pitch to Fury. So we're seeing now decks where that card does actually fit in and is doing great work there. So I would have Fury at this point on my list too.
Yeah, it's just been really impressive every time it's been cast against me. It's probably, I'm just looking at this list, it's probably the card that I have had the least experience with and against, but it's been so impactful when it's been cast that I think it's just a matter of the shells that it's in are less broad or less immediately attractive than the other cards, but it's just carrying as much weight as any of the other cards. Right above it at my number 6, I have Grief. I don't know how much of this is actually the card being downgraded because of having to play against Urza Saga with it, but this card has still been really absurd. When I was playing through all the different Orzhov decks with it, it repeatedly was just like free rolling games. It's really good. It's not quite as good as I thought it would be, but again, like I said, I think that some of that may just be the power level of other cards has pushed other things to a slightly different level.
Yeah, we're seeing a kind of a backlash to the initial hype now, where people are saying stuff like, "Oh, where are all of the grief and ephemerate decks that made you think the sky was falling?" And the answer is, well, they're there, and they're still doing decently well for the most part. It's just there is a ton of powerful stuff in the format thanks to this set, and if we reach the point where Urza Saga may be the single card doing the most to keep grief down at the moment. If Saga has to be escorted from the building, then grief is gonna enter the discussion again in a big way. So I don't think I would not write off this card by any means. Still one of the absolute headliners of this set to me, but not not vying in contention for number one the way that it was in those early stages.
Yeah, would you also have this on your top 8, or?
I would, but I'm glad that we're at the point where I would debate, should Grief or Fury be higher for me? And then you have Ragavan in here at number 5. I think that's a good spot for Ragavan. I think it's still, we don't want to overcorrect. We don't want to go from, this card is so overrated in Modern to, well, this card is incredible and we need the hammer to come down on it. I think it's just a very solid tool to add to the format, and in the middle of this kind of list is a good spot for it to land.
Yeah, I think that this is also kind of the turning point on the list where like Grief, Fury, and Ending are all like fractional pieces of the format, and all the cards that are like 5 and up are just defining aspects of Modern right now. And Ragavan is one of those. It has changed the landscape of what you need to do on the first turn of the game to not just kind of lose to your opponent's mana accelerated, slight card advantage, continuance plays, and then like it's also just a good card going late. It feels like they kind of took Dark Confidant and decided, how can we make this card cost 1 mana instead of 2?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Dark Confidant did need a boost to remain relevant in Modern. You can't just have the same old man showing up with the same old tricks. And Ragavan is the kind of younger contender to that throne now. In terms of cards that I would have on my list that you don't, I would still have Shardless Agent. I think that even though people have kind of collectively agreed not to push the envelope on that card, I still think that envelope is there to be pushed, and maybe it's not as high as I had it before, where it was, is Shardless Agent number 1 or is Urza Saga, but it would still land towards the middle of this list for me.
Okay. So I guess before we talk about the top 4 that I have, would any of these not make your top 4?
So should we spoil what those are right now then?
Yeah, let's just fire it off. I've got Urza Saga, Dragon Rage Channeler, Asmore, and Solitude in that order. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, and that's going down from 1 to 4. I think that's a good top 4. I can't take issue with anything in there. What I would say is, discussing Asmore for a second, one thing where I think I was maybe ahead of the game during previous season was people were saying, all right, Asmore is the big deal here, and you play a cookbook or maybe 2 because it's a free roll, right? That just is what you do when you have Asmore in your deck. But the possibility of cookbook by itself as an engine piece that you build around as a reason to play a deck, I think really has shone through in these blue Asmore decks, where you're using that to fuel cards like Thought Monitor, which an honorable mention on your list in its own right. That's a card which, if you don't have the cookbook, you're not casting that card anytime soon, but just being able to convert one resource into another, and especially that resource being an artifact where you care about the name on that widget as well, is so crucial to that deck functioning. And you're honestly more of a cookbook deck nowadays than you are an Asmore deck, and having cookbook is what lets you cast the Asmore, where you're moving away from 4 Street Wraith and then a bunch of other discard outlets. Cookbook is what ties the room together and is the thing that makes everything else work.
Yeah, I think I just didn't process like I think it's that you just start reading Asmore and then like you get to the middle of the card and then you have to like flip to a different page to start reading it, and like you never flip back and get to the point where you're like, oh, this card is just a free Visara.
Ari, you get to midway through the name, and then you need to sit down and get your bearings and just take a short break, and then by the time you get to, you search your library for a card named Underworld Cookbook, your eyes have glazed over, you're fully checked out at that point.
I'm going to be honest, I have never actually gone from left to right on the title bar of this card. I just kind of have skipped that. Just, it's gone. It's not something I ever read there.
Yeah, I think just calling it Asmore is something we can all agree to do to make each other's lives a lot easier.
Yeah. But yeah, I underestimated the cookbook. I didn't really process how easy it would be just to like, play this for 1 mana and then just immediately freely kill creatures over and over. And I don't know how much of that was even the Oval Chase Daredevil synergy, because that's a card that's been on my radar for a while because of just nonsense like this. But like, I think I just didn't process how good that resource conversion is even on the surface.
Yeah, I almost think that in some of these blue Asmore decks, if you force them to replace the Daredevil with, Scree or Master of Death, I don't know how much really changes there, and I actually wonder if, like, is exactly 4 Daredevil effects the right number, or should you be playing one of those other cards as a 5th or 6th copy or something? But that's also a space that hasn't really been explored, is, is there some kind of Master of Death deck with where that card has a bunch of synergies it works with, and you can build in some kind of second package there? I don't know, but either way, Asmore as it's so hard to pass for many reasons when you read it at first, but you don't realize until you see it in action how it's almost like a prison piece, right? It's like you build a board control prison deck where if Asmore is in play, no creature is long for this world, and that really constrains what you can do in the format.
Yeah, it is. I think it's probably the second most like offensively warping card in the set. The other being Urza Saga, just doing Urza Saga stuff.
Yeah, I do wonder at this point. We mentioned that maybe Through the Breach for Emrakul is off the table in a Solitude format, but is there a way where, depending on you get above that 6 toughness breakpoint for Asmore, or if you can find stuff which is okay, maybe it's weak to 1/3 of that triangle. You take the L against Solitude, but you find a way to exploit Asmore or Yawgmoth or other stuff. Is that a viable route to explore, do you think?
So I think I have a little bit of this experience. This was playing with, we talked about doing science with the Velomachus Turns deck last week. And that's sort of in this ballpark, right? Where you're creating a haste creature. I think there might be something to breaching an Emrakul with the Fairy Time Raveler backup to cover against Solitude. Because you can actually kill Asmores. It's not the most reliable, but like if you don't need to do it every single time because they won't be able to accumulate the food, I think that you may just be able to breach through it X% of the time and then like just kill the Asmore whatever the other percent of the time is and be fine with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could argue that is what the Yawgmoth deck is doing, right? Where protection from humans is a good line of text to have against Asmore. You're a little dodgy against Solitude, but the rest of it is good enough to make up for that.
Yeah, and I guess with Yawgmoth, the other thing it's doing is that like the big problem with Asmore is like you control a creature, they play Asmore, they kill that creature, you are then forced to kill Asmore to continue the game, and you're down on the exchange. If like the only thing you care about them killing with Asmore, or I guess later Solitude, comes down, like gets its value, comes down after Asmore, like gives you the ability to position, like Yawgmoth does, it's a lot better of an exchange. Like Yawgmoth against Solitude, like you can just like get some cards out of it and move on with your life. Yawgmoth doesn't die to Asmore, but even if it did, again, you can just get your cards and move on. And like, what are they Asmore besides Yawgmoth? Your undying creatures? Okay.
Right. Yeah, so that covers the cards that have earned respect with the early results from MH2. We'll take a short break and come back with some highly disrespectful nonsense of the week.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcast, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more. before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Okay, and let's round it out here with a really fertile crop of nonsense that our good friends in the Magic Online queues have decided to bless us with this week. Where do we start? There's a lot on this list.
I want to highlight just very quickly, because I don't know if this is the right list for it, but I did like this idea. I'd kind of forgotten about it, but this is by Magic Online user Seventh Prophet. It's a blue-red liquid metal deck, but it's mostly liquid metal Torque, not liquid metal coating. It's got some coatings, but really the core, or one of the cores of this deck is that if you turn Saheeli Rai into an artifact, it copies itself. The copy's an artifact. You lose the original Saheeli Rai to the Planeswalker Legend rule. The new Saheeli copies itself. And with Altar of the Brood, you get to mill your opponent out. So this deck's really, really using that. And it's using Karn Great Creator with the liquid metal cards, and then can also Karn for an Altar. So I thought those draws just pretty cool. I don't quite know what you're supposed to do with that interaction, but the fact that we've seen a bunch of liquid metal coating just naturally like killing artifacts decks, makes me think that having access to some kind of combo there like this is an interesting upgrade.
Yeah, I love that Torque gets you 2 4-mana for Karn the Great Creator, even though Torque by itself doesn't target land, so maybe then you need to find the coating with the Karn to set that up, but that adds a nice consistency there. And yeah, just the fact that you have this backdoor combo via Saheeli becoming an artifact and like endlessly copying itself, and if you have a card like Altar of the Brood that cares about that, then that's an infinite loop right there. Just a ton of cool stuff going on in this deck. And now that you have up to 8 coatings, and I think this deck should have the 3rd liquid metal coating in the main deck, that then lets you really justify loading up on whether it's Prismari Command, which is another great addition to that roster, or a Braid, or whatever it is. You can get your A plus B together quite consistently, while also just having a good fair plan in the form of these flexible removal spells, braids, and Karns. You can really make that whole thing tick.
And Urza Saga in this deck. I had not thought about Prismari Command. That's really awesome. I would definitely play some of those in this deck. Prismari Command's been really impressive when I played it recently, so I would get on that card.
Yeah, very excited to try and griefing some people with this one. We also had a Waste Not Ragdos Arcanus deck. So this is I'm trying to recall the exact clauses on Waste Not from memory here. It does a lot of stuff. Make them discard cards, and you're going to profit somehow. The one thing that really appealed to me with this shell was Dream Salvage. So this is just blue or black hybrid, 1-mana card. You draw a card for each card that your opponent has discarded this turn. So we have Profane Tutor in conjunction with Arcanus to set that up. And then Arcanus can also flash back the Dream Salvage to, you can load up drawing another 10, 12 cards on a single turn. And pretty easy to stitch together a win from that spot.
Yeah, the fair uses of Profane Tutor are so interesting. This card has been really impressive when I played against it, mostly out of the Adnals deck, but just the speed at which it unsuspends and the flexibility it gives you on the turn that your tutor actually resolves are pretty powerful. Waste Not also notably, so the clause for creatures is you get a zombie. So every time your opponent makes a food with Cookbook, you get a zombie token off of their Daredevil.
Oh, that's hot. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. This has not been my jam in the past, but I'm not opposed. I think the one Dream Salvage is what does it for me here, really.
That's what hooks you in, and then the other 59 cards, make the case for themselves. But yeah, very exciting and very nonsensical. So perfect contender for this segment.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Goblin Twin?
I sure do. So this is Andrew Brown, Watsy Andrew Brown, back at it again. And this is using Imperial Recruiter, one of my initial set of MH2 top 8 highlights, to stitch together both the Conspicuous Snoop Bogart Harbinger for Kiki-Jiki combos, and also a Deceiver Exarch Kiki-Jiki combo with, we've got Ether Vials in this deck helping to mitigate the clunkiness of both of those combos, and then just Imperial Recruiter tying the whole room together and letting you support 2 of these combos in the same deck. That being said, I guess it gives you redundancy of sorts, but anything that's good against one half of this deck is also very good against the other half. So I don't know if you're actually addressing any of the other weaknesses there.
Well, hear me out. Deceiver Exarch is a Phyrexian Cleric, and therefore it dodges Plague Engineer, which shuts off one of your combos. So that's really what this deck is trying to do.
Sure. I guess you get these like Mero Reedry style turns where you have a Vial on 3 and then you Vial in the Exarch and then that untaps your thing and then you Vial in the Recruiter to get the Kiki-Jiki and you hardcast that. We've got it all going on here.
Yeah, I don't actually know if this deck is functional in a game where it doesn't draw Ether Vial, but it's trying.
But you're excited to find out is the second half of that sentence. Yeah.
No, it's trying. I don't know if I'm excited to find out.
Okay, don't want to put words in your mouth here. Another deck which really has to be seen to be believed is I'm going to call it a Mardu Boom Bust deck. So this is from the Nobodies, who, if you have experience in diving through these 5-0 deck dumps, you will see them playing all manner of bizarre artifact decks, and this one is no exception. So this one is keying off the fact that the artifact dual lands in MH2 have indestructible. So we've got a Rustveil Bridge, we've got a 4 Drossforge Bridge here in the mana base going along with our Urza Sagas. And this is fueling Cleansing Wildfire as an amazing ramp spell where, sometimes that card is just good main deck hate against your opponents. Other times it's targeting your artifact lands or your flag zones to jump you up to 4 for Khan the Great Creator or whatever else. But sometimes you get to pair that with Boom Bust as well. So Boom targeting Drossforge Bridge and your opponent's land is just a good Stone Rain or Sinkhole to have in the format for 2 mana.
Yeah, I also like the combination of Wildfire ramping you to bust.
Sure. Yeah, you use one Sinkhole to get up to the Sinkhole, the actual Armageddon effect in this deck here.
Yeah, I also like that. So if you look at the split of the artifact lands, it's 4 Drossforge Bridge. And so you had this Flagstones problem with these decks in the past where like Flagstones just makes white mana. So you're maximizing on the red-black indestructible artifact land here to kind of balance that out. It's kind of great.
That's nice. We got the one Survive Triome to get with our Flagstones to fix our mana base after that. So just love everything that's going on in this deck, which also just incidentally has a Stoneforge Mystic, Cauldron Complete, Battle Skull package. We got to fill in the slot somehow, and we need a threat, so why not that one?
Yeah, I think it might be worth talking about in context of this top 8 list topic, Cauldron Complete. I have been not super impressed with it, but it's another one of those cards in the kind of counterspell range where it's it adds a significant amount of leverage, but not a ton more than Stoneforge Mystic already had.
I think its stock is declining now because people are just much more ready to kill a 2 toughness creature than they have been in the early weeks where they were trying a bunch of different stuff and so on. Now your Stoneforge Mystic often does die on sight, and that's why you still have the sword and the battle skull as these safer targets that you can realistically hardcast. But unless you're against something like Amulet Titan, for example, that plan of turn 2 off, fetch my Cauldron, and that's my Clark, that is a lot less reliable.
Yeah, I also want to point out the weakness of Cauldron Complete to Archmage's Charm.
God.
Really big problem. Yeah, very big problem. You gain control of the Germ token, and then you have the indestructible 5/5 text box. Yeah, so I think that if the Murktide Regent version of Izzet really sticks around, that might be the nail in the coffin there for Cauldron Complete, at least for the short term.
Yeah, but let's close this out by getting to the actual trophy winner here for our Nonsense of the Week.
Yeah, so this is a Golgari Planeswalker deck that I actually tried. I was kind of just like, well, I'm gonna buy these Ignoble Hierarchs and Grists anyways to play Yawgmoth, so why don't I just try this deck? It's a lot of the traditional Jund stuff that you would expect: Fatal Push, Inquisition, Thoughtseize, Tarmogoyf. But it's got a lot of Ignoble Hierarch and Birds of Paradise to ramp to a bunch of Planeswalkers and Karth the Lion.
I was going to say, you're going to need to read the text on that one. We can't take it for granted.
Yeah, it is. When Karth enters the battlefield or a Planeswalker you control dies, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You can reveal a Planeswalker from them and put them in your hand. The rest go on the bottom in a random order. And then Planeswalker loyalties abilities you activate costs an additional +1 to activate, which, like, that ability is easier to sum up with, like, imagine your Planeswalkers just get an extra loyalty every turn, because you're going to activate them once, and they're going to get an extra loyalty on that activation. Karth was actually really impressive when I played this deck. 7 cards is a lot. So it basically was just like a 4-mana 3/5 that always drew you a good Planeswalker. My issue was actually more with the Planeswalkers that were in this list themselves, and I think this might be a fixable issue. Specifically, like, this is where a lot of my complaints about Grist without fuel for it come from. It was just kind of like this slow, dopey creature engine. And then Garruk Wildspeaker is, like, unexciting in the way this deck is curved out. It tops out a little low. I would love to see more Vraska Golgari Queen. Nisa Vital Force, I don't quite know. I think it probably should just be Nisa Who Shakes the World. A card that actually kills your opponent. But something along those lines is fine. Liliana the Veil was fine. Liliana the Last Hope felt like more of a sideboard card, but a card I would want. And the number of creature lands was a little low. There was just a Treetop Village, and I would kind of want more to kind of make up for the fact that there's a million birds and nobles in this deck, which you do need, because, like, the Planeswalker plan is very important to cast them early. But, like, there is some good stuff going on here, and I am interested in playing with Karth the Lion in the future. One of the kind of funny things about Karth is that I kept ending up in spots where I was like, oh, I've got this Planeswalker, I'm going to use it to kill something. I really wish I could just have it die now, because I'm, like, -2ing my Liliana, so I could find another Liliana or whatever and just keep going off. But, like, it's impossible. It's just, you can't. Like, Karth just makes it so hard for your Planeswalkers to ever die. Like, they're not gonna kill your Planeswalker while you control Karth. They're gonna kill Karth instead. Like, your Planeswalkers just don't die with this card. It really is just like ETB, find a Planeswalker, and all your abilities cost 1 less, and you ramp to ultimates faster, which is all good stuff.
Yeah, so many people on the other side of Liliana of the Veil have been like, why can't this card just bid itself to make me sacrifice a creature? And now, for the first time, the Jund player is wondering that as well. My first reaction looking at this deck was, does this want to be a Khan the Great Creator deck, where there might be a stronger correlation between Khan living and you winning the game than with basically any other Planeswalker in Modern that these decks get to play? And it seems like Khan would patch up some of the issues of, generating value over the course of the game doesn't matter because my opponent is, trying to combo off in some way. It can find the things that answer the various linear decks that are going on. It seems like this would be a great Khan deck more so than anything else. And at that point, you don't have to worry about Garruk Wildspeaker or Nissa Vital Force or whatever the third tier Planeswalkers end up being.
Yeah, that's very possible. I was also thinking that maybe this deck wants to shift to be like a green-red base that's kind of splashing Karth. Again, Fatal Push is just not a great card right now, but, like, red removal probably is. Ren and 6 is a pretty great Planeswalker.
Sure. And we're not leaning that hard on the other black cards, right? We've got 4 Inquisition, 1 Thoughtseize. Don't know if those are the right numbers in general, but that suggests that you could move away to, some other color combo and still get the job done.
Yeah, and the one other card that I kind of want to talk about are the Seraph Realm Eaters in the sideboard. That card was not horrific. I would not have it as a sideboard card, but I think that is a card that is worth exploring in main deck spaces in the format.
Did you get to crime punishment any people? I think that's the dream people are chasing right now.
I did not get the crime punishment anyone. I did not draw it at the right time.
Okay, that still seems like a a good tool to have access to, or is that a kind of it's a cute interaction that people discover, but it doesn't actually do the relevant thing that you need it to do?
I think it depends how much. I think it's better in like Yawgmoth shells where clearing an Asmore and the tokens is better, like the 2-mana application of it. I don't know how much that matters here relative to like. It feels a little more constrained in terms of like, well, sometimes it clears an Urza Saga, but I would love for it to do something else when it doesn't do that.
Yeah, it kind of feels like it's the EE for one, and this deck also does have EE in the sideboard against a deck like Prowess, for example, right? Where you just you sweep away the Chandler and the Shadow, or whatever mix of threats they have to buy you some time, but maybe just old school OG engineered explosives does that job better.
Yeah, probably.
I guess with Birds of Paradise, we could crime some people at some point. Sadly, that one, because it's from 2006, does not actually get Planeswalkers, so a little bit limited in that regard, but we can dare to dream.
Yeah, wait, you said unfortunately? I thought that was fortunately. Because you are the Planeswalker deck. Like, that's one of the big things, right? You want a one-sided sweep?
No, I meant the crime side.
Oh, the crime side. Oh. I'm not gonna lie, I had not ever thought about casting the crime side.
Probably for the best, yeah. One other Planeswalker that does show up in the sideboard is Ashiok Dreamrender, and that's a card that, specifically against Amulet Titan, getting that one out on turn 2 even via Hierarch and Birds often can wrap up a game by itself. And also, if you do manage to buy more time, a great thing to dig for with your card when that card is relevant.
Yeah, and I think that very specifically having that on turn 2 is super relevant because of the whole Urza Saga nonsense.
Sure. Yeah, stopping the final chapter from searching for anything can be a big deal there. And this deck is better than a lot of Ashiok decks at just defending it from some construct tokens aiming to attack it down.
Yeah, well, also just like the speed of Amulet right now, like the games where they turn 1 a Saga, like you need your hate card to come down before that. And if it was without Birds of Paradise, you could not do that.
Right. So, very intriguing deck that I think actually has room to operate in the format and some room to develop further. So I would recommend people look at this one if they want a shell to refine and get some clout for.
Yeah, certainly needs refining, but also like the cards were not like the core concept was not bad.
Yeah. So I think that covers it for our nonsense of the week and just for us for the week in general, unless you have anything else.
I think that's about it.
All right. So you can find me on Twitter at Dominharvia. You can find Ari on Twitter at ARMLX. You can find our content every week over at StarCityGames.com, along with so many other great writers, including our mortal foe, Patrick Sullivan, and so much else besides. But until next week, it's been great talking to you as always, and we'll see you soon. Take care, everyone.